David here with Figboot on Pens, back again with another ink review. The ink I have for you today is the latest addition to the Papier Plume lineup. While Papier Plume does release many limited edition inks, the one that I'll be showing you today is an addition to their New Orleans collection and will be available on a regular basis moving forward. The name of this ink is Café Diabolique. Café Diabolique translates from French to mean devilishly burned coffee. It was invented at Antoine's Restaurant, which is a very famous eating establishment in New Orleans. They began serving it back in the late 1800s, and Antoine's Restaurant is well known as the birthplace for several famous dishes such as oysters Rockefeller or egg sardou, and many others, including Café Diabolique. The preparation of the drink is likened to a magician's show. All of the ingredients are gracefully combined tableside in ornate bowls. It involves a fair amount of alcohol, and there are lots of flames involved. It is quite the production. So, in order to get a closer look at this ink and learn a little bit more about this flamboyant concoction it is named after, please join me over here at camera 2. So this is what the bottle looks like. These are 1 ounce bottles. A couple of things I always like about the Papier Plume bottles. First of all, we have a really nice wax seal here at the top, and the wax kind of drips over the side. And then also they have some very interesting labels. I could tell that this label, I think they got a new printer because the label on this one is a bit of a higher quality than some of the other labels that they've come out with. But it's a nice bottle, and it holds a fair amount of ink. This is what the color looks like. It is named after a rather burnt coffee, and the color is a rather burnt coffee color, kind of a dark char brown. In regard to some color comparisons for some other inks, here it is with Three Oysters Gogong, and here it is with Ferris Wheel Press Beaver Dam Brown, which is a little bit more on the brown side. Here it is with Private Reserve Chocolate, which is, again, more on the brown side, but some of the sheening is on the darker side. Here it is with Three Oysters Seal Brown. But the closest comparison that I have is actually a custom ink that I had made by Kiwi Ink. And this is Kiwi Ink Padre. And I had this color made up to basically compare to the San Diego Padre uniforms and the brown that is on their uniforms. And that's very similar in color to the Café Diabolique. And in order to write the names on these cards, I used my drill log with my Jonathan Brooks holder. If you happen to support the drill log and we're looking for another holder, by all means, I would reach out to Jonathan Brooks through his website and see if he can make you one of these. He'd be glad to do so, and they're real handy. This is what the ink looks like on some 52-gram Tomoe River paper. This is with a Q-tip application, and then this is more of a smear, and then some drops here. And even though it's been a day, that it's still not quite dry. You can see here that there's not a lot of sheening, only when you apply a very heavy amount of ink where you get some sheen on it. So I wouldn't necessarily categorize this as a heavy sheening ink. In regard to bleed through, there's a heavy application here, so I'm not concerned that it bled through. And this was an inordinate amount of ink, so that's to be expected there. So here we have Papier Plume Café Diabolique. For this header here, I used my Pilot Parallel in the 2.4 millimeter. These pens are really nice for doing calligraphy or thicker lines. You can see here it's just 2 pieces of metal, and the ink flows between those two. You can see here that this ink is rather saturated. It really didn't change much in regard to shading with the more passes. This is Rhodia 80-gram paper. I'd say the ghosting and bleed is really low. You can see here that you can really hardly even see any ghosting on the other side at all. I'd say the shade is low as well, and I put the sheen as medium low just because if you do a heavier application, then it will get a little bit of sheen to it. But even though I put a heavier amount here, this is with a Q-tip application here on the Rhodia, there's really no sheen to speak of. In regard to pens, first up we have one from Leonardo. This is the Momento Zero Grande, and this is the coffee version, so I felt that that was appropriate. And it also has my favorite extra fine nib in my collection. It is a stainless steel nib, but it's a glorious extra fine nib. I really enjoy it. So we have the Leonardo Momento Zero, Grande. And this is an extra fine. Next up is a pen that I just received this past week, and so far I'm really liking it, and that is the Diplomat E-Locks. And you can see here that it is a black pen, and then it has some grooves here, and the grooves are painted orange. It just looks really cool. And then when you open it up, the section is a really nice orange as well. So here we have the Diplomat. This is the Arrow E-Locks. And this is a medium. And finally, we have a pen from Pilot, and this is a Custom 91. This is a double broad. For my Pilots, there's a lot of pens that kind of look the same, and so I like to keep my stickers on my Pilots, so I know it kind of reminds me what nib I have on them. So here we have a Pilot Custom Heritage '91, and this is a double broad, and it's a very smooth double broad. It's a really nice nib. Okay, for the writing sample, I wanted to teach you a little bit about what Café Diabolique actually is and how it's prepared. There's a lot of really neat videos on YouTube that go into detail and showing exactly what it goes into the making of it, and it's quite the show. But I actually tried to contact a number of creators on YouTube to ask if I could use some clips of their videos, because you shouldn't just take people's videos, you should ask permission, and every single one that I contacted did not get back to me. So while that was a little bit frustrating, I did come up with a solution in order to still show you a little bit about what is going on. Let's see here. What I said is, in a copper bowl, you want to combine cinnamon, cloves, lemon peel, sugar, brandy, and orange liqueur. And this is what that kind of looks like. What happens is this is a copper bowl, and you have a ladle, and there is a bottom section to the bowl here. And what happens is you pour some of the concoction in the bottom and light it on fire. And so then you're kind of moving the liquid back and forth while it is on fire. So it's in fire in the cauldron, as well as the flames coming up from below. So now you can see why they call it burnt coffee or Café Diabolique. Next up, we have the Diplomat. I said you want to peel an orange, embed it with cloves, and proceed to pour flaming liquid over it and back into the bowl. And this is what that looks like. Now, I've seen it where the lemon peel sometimes still has, the orange peel sometimes has the orange still attached to it. But what they're doing is basically taking the flaming liquid and pouring it over there so it gets the flavor of the orange peel as well as the cloves, and then it goes back into the cauldron, and it's quite the show. Then finally, I said you want to pour black coffee into the flaming cauldron, and as more coffee is added and the liquor content goes down, the flames will diminish. And this is what that looks like. You pour the coffee in, and the more coffee you add, the less the flames will be. And then they go ahead and serve that coffee and take maybe some of the lemon slices that were inside, or the lemon peel that was inside the cauldron, and put it inside the cup. And there you have your Café Diabolique. In regard to the ink, I'd say the flow is medium-high. For the drying time, I felt it was reasonable, basically between 15 and 30 seconds for both the extra fine and the medium. Let's go ahead and take a look at some waterproof tests. And while we are letting that sit for a second, let's take a look at the chromatography. I know I always mention it, but I always think it's cool to see the ink creep up and then the colors separate. And this is what it ends up looking like. There's a heavy amount of olive green, and then there's some blue, and then some reds and purples, and then a little gray at the end there. So I thought that was interesting how you put that all together and it kind of comes out to a burnt brown. And let's go ahead and dab that. And while this doesn't profess to be a waterproof ink, I think it held up pretty well. When it's more the paper that's falling apart than the ink, but the ink is holding up pretty nice. I said that Papier Plume Café Diabolique will be available beginning November 5th, which is Fountain Pen Day this year, and will retail for $10 on the Papier Plume site. So there we have the Café Diabolique from Papier Plume. It's an interesting brown. I don't have tons of browns in my collection, and so that it's an interesting colorway that doesn't necessarily match up with anything I currently have in my collection. So I think that it's well worth checking out. Okay, until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.